I created a vampire crab ecosystem. It comes complete with its own waterfall, beach landing, and even has its own drip cave. I started by applying clear aquarium-safe silicone to all the seams, just to be extra sure that this wouldn't leak in the future. My centerpiece, and also doubling as my water feature, would be a piece of Mopani driftwood. I had noticed that there was a depression as well as some ridge lines along the top that could look really cool if I could get the water to run along it. I used pieces of aquarium filter foam as well as a hot glue gun to attach the Mopani wood to the aquarium base. The aquarium filter foam would also double as my base pond area for where the water would be. I now had a pretty clear idea of how I wanted this whole setup to look, and I started to use more filter foam to really flesh out my idea, applying hot glue gun as I went to keep it all together. I also closed off the gap underneath the wood because I wanted to separate the water area from the land later on. I had some more aquarium filter foam, but this time with a rougher gradient because this is where my beach landing would be, and I wanted it to hold some of the sand particles. I used some aquarium divider grid to build a base for the land area on the other side, and also to hold up the piece of wood because it was leaning too much and I needed it more straight for the water to flow more evenly later on. I used some black aquarium-safe silicone to attach everything and also to close the seam at the bottom where the filter foam is. This will prevent any sand from getting through and force the water to filter through the actual foam media, where I added some activated carbon to help the water cycle initially. I also built and attached a tower to the corner using aquarium divider grid and more black aquarium-safe silicone, which would ultimately house my pump and tubing. I used more aquarium silicone to score the back glass and anywhere else that I ultimately would be attaching spray foam. This will give it a better surface area to attach to. I also completed my drainage layer using more aquarium filter foam. One of the main reasons that I like to use filter foam is that it's super lightweight. It also lets water pass through, but doesn't allow the same for substrate. However, roots can take hold and they'll clean the water for you as it passes through, so it's a win-win. After the silicone had cured, I used a razor blade to trim off some of the excess filter foam and really shape out my water area. I also smoothed out the beach landing so it wouldn't be so steep. That way I wouldn't lose so much sand to erosion so quickly. Next, I layered in some window screen just to keep the sand from falling through, as well as the substrate on the other side. Trimmed it to size and tucked her in. And then I sealed the seams off with a generous coating of more aquarium silicone to prevent anything from slipping into the seams. I wanted to contrast the beach landing on the left side using some decorative rocks to build a rocky outcrop on the right side. I attached them with some more aquarium-safe silicone. I had a few left over, so I built a couple more rocky outcrops on the beach landing. This would also help keep some of the sand in place. I also had a cool fossilized shell that I wanted to add because it matched the color of the rocky outcrop, and I thought it would look cool if I attached it and made it look like it was part of the setup. And just like that, my false bottom was more or less complete, and it was time to start focusing on the backdrop. I took a brick of cocoa peat and let it soak in water to let it expand. While my cocoa peat expanded, I popped off the lid and focused on the water feature. I had a small submersible pump that would be housed in the tower. Here's a little pro tip. The wires can be popped in through these little openings. Most terrariums have this, and I didn't realize that when I built my first one. I added some more window screen on the tower section to obviously keep anything from getting into the water pump. And you might have guessed how I attached and closed off the seams. I had cut some aquarium divider grid to size and had made some makeshift stilts to put it on. I wanted to have an area for the water to flow to the water section from the pump, and I didn't want to rely on the tubing to do it. I also added some more filter foam to the backdrop where I wanted to have a ridge ultimately later on. I also wanted to add some levels and some depth to my land area and wanted to separate the different sections, so I fleshed out some more aquarium filter foam for that. I also added a little bit more on the beach landing to help keep the sand from slipping so much. I had the basic skeleton complete, and now it was time to put it all together with some great stuff expanding foam, the pond-safe version. After about 5 minutes, you can start to play with it a little bit. It hasn't fully cured and hasn't finished expanding yet, but it is a little bit more on the malleable side. I took advantage of this to smooth out and also roll up more of the foam to the area where I ultimately would be cutting in a notch to make a river to the water feature. It'll take several hours to cure, but if you want to be sure, you can wait about a day. I set to work using a razor blade to shave off the outer shiny crust. This is a necessary step. Otherwise, the aquarium-safe silicone won't adhere to the expanding foam, which will later on then hold the sphagnum moss and cocoa peat mixture making up the backdrop. It's definitely tedious work. So I took a break and started to carve out the river feature. Here's what 3 hours with a razor blade will look like. It almost looks cool enough to just leave it like this, but I don't think it would last. So I always kind of feel bad when I smother it with, you guessed it, more aquarium safe silicone. Followed by a healthy dosing of sphagnum moss and cocoa peat mixture. The sphagnum moss will help keep in moisture, and the cocoa peat is a great media for the moss mix that I'm ultimately going to add to hold on to. I wanted there to be a dark shadow effect at the back of the water feature, so I used more aquarium safe silicone and coated it with aquarium activated carbon. There was already a pretty good landing spot on the wood for the water to flow through, but I was worried that it wasn't quite deep enough, so I went ahead and drilled out a little bit deeper of a hole, which also would add a nice spiral which should keep the water close to the wood. I vacuumed out the excess sphagnum moss, cocoa peat, and wood shavings. And then I trimmed down the last little pieces in the way, keeping the water from getting to my new, freshly created spiral, as well as a little bit of the wood, which was slow, tedious work since this wood is super dense. I used my snips to cut in a notch for the tubing to go. And secured it with everybody's favorite, black aquarium silicone. I used more activated carbon on top of silicone for the edges, and repeated the process with clear silicone for the bottom as well as white sand. I let that dry and vacuumed out the excess in between. I added distilled water, and it was time to test the water feature. Great success! I added white beach sand to the water area as well as my beach area. I added my substrate as well as a mixture of horticultural charcoal. I topped this off with some leaf litter consisting of oak leaves. I also added a piece of dragonstone on my beach landing where I had added a little bit more charcoal. I had some seashells as well as some cool looking rocks that obviously also went into the mix. I had some really cool plants that I liked from my poison dart frog vivarium, so I borrowed some of those to add to my water transition area. Next, I prepped the backdrop by misting it with distilled water before adding my Frog Daddy's wet moss mix. I highly recommend this product. Just go to frogdaddy.com and order the wet moss mix and apply it to a wet wall just like this. Just make sure you keep it nice and moist, and after just a few days you'll start to see all sorts of moss start to sprout out, as well as tons of different microferns. Here's how she looks after a week, and this is about a month and a half. With the river flowing, so was my excitement for crabs, and I finally had my order. I had managed to get the last of the 7 vampire crabs on sale at aquaticarts.com. I popped them into my terrarium and was surprised to see 2 of them were extremely active already. I also wanted to make sure that they could actively hunt for some food, so I introduced a culture of orange springtails for them as well. They'll also eat all of the decaying plant matter and any of the food that's left over from the crabs, or if a crab should pass, they'll definitely become springtail food. Make sure you like and subscribe on the way out. Don't forget all products are in the description, and don't forget to check out my poison dart frog terrarium build guide.